Welcome everyone to our Greenie Healthcare webinar, Finding the Win-Win-Wins, Managing Hospital Facilities in Challenging Times. I'm Mike Pagel, the Program Manager of Greenie Healthcare. As mentioned in the first webinar, these forums are the bigger events, so there are two parts of this event today. Part one was this morning. It included an executive perspective on the importance of environment to healthcare and another session on resources available to hospitals. It was recorded and it's definitely worth watching. It'll be available on our site within the next week or so. Part two that we're starting right now is the technical session. So Ian will run through the agenda in a few minutes on what to expect today. There's two ways to interact with our hosts. Please always use the Q&A button if you want your questions answered during the webinar by the speakers. If we don't get a chance to or if we run out of time to answer them, we'll definitely follow up and send them to the speakers. So just make note of who you're addressing the questions to. You can use chat for private questions to myself or any of the panelists or need help with the webinar app. This webinar is recorded also and will be posted, as I mentioned, to the site, greening.com. And for our forum, we're pleased to be sponsoring with CHES, the Canadian Healthcare Engineering Society. And big thank you to our sponsors, Enbridge Gas, Thermogenics, and our event sponsor, Armstrong. Greenie Healthcare is run under the nonprofit organization Climate Challenge Network, and your hosts today are Ian Jarvis, Executive Director of the Climate Challenge Network, and Amdeep Diyal, the Technical Director. And for our event sponsor, you should definitely take a look at their website to see their services. They're a great technical organization. And with that, I'll pass it over to Ian for the acknowledgements and the agenda.
Thank you, Michael, and welcome everybody. And let's step into this. As Michael said, this is our forum, so it's online. It's a two-part piece. This morning was all about the why. What is expected of hospital facility directors on a go-forward basis around the whole climate change agenda as we hopefully begin to emerge from the pandemic of the last 2 years and more. The climate crisis has certainly not gone away. In a way, we've lost 2 years on our progress towards it. This morning was getting us refocused, hopefully on the why we need to pay attention to this and find time in our already ridiculously busy days to plan around energy efficiency, plan around emissions reductions. This afternoon is very much the how session, where we want to spend some time talking about metrics and benchmarks, and how do you actually begin to quantify your opportunity to position yourself relative to other hospitals, and begin to plan the pathway forward to, as we say here, the low carbon future. Then the two biggest technical areas that the Greenie Healthcare has been working on for the past 2 years now, the idea of ventilation resiliency that both reflects the indoor air quality and the health and safety of occupants, especially in light of what's been happening with the pandemic, but also not losing sight of the fact that we need to deliver ventilation, which is the biggest energy user in all of our hospitals. We need to deliver it in a sustainable fashion, which means at the least fossil fuel consumption and associated emissions production. And we'll share with you the great work that Alberta Health Service is doing in a very systematic way around multiple sites, working their way through harvesting what we're referring to here as the new low-hanging fruit. The second big technical area this afternoon is this whole idea of the low-carbon central plant. But those of you who've been involved with Greenie Healthcare for a couple of years know this has been an ongoing area of research and development for the program. Today we want to share with you what we think is a classic case study of an important mid-sized hospital in Headwaters, and what that direction, what that roadmap towards a low carbon central plant that's emerging, what that looks like, but importantly discussing with Janet and and Canada Infrastructure Bank, and Daniela around how do you get there from here? What does that look like if we change, if we pivot away from like-for-like equipment replacement coming out of our building condition audit to something that looks very different, where we're looking at the low carbon alternatives, and how do you fund that? How do you make that work? How do you bring all that together? So this is our agenda for the afternoon. As always, as Michael said, we look for your questions, which we will either address during the webinar if they fit into, if you like, the flow of the discussion here, and if not, we will most definitely respond to them after and re-engage with panelists if that's appropriate. But the Q&A becomes part of the proceedings coming out of this forum. So please do ask your questions, and we will commit to respond to them either during the session or subsequently to make sure we get you a proper response. So this is where we're going. Kind of fasten your seatbelts, and let's hope we give everybody here some takeaways, some practical takeaways that they can use to either continue their journey or to begin their journey down the path towards the low carbon future. So first, we wanted to bring you up to date with where we're going with benchmarks and targets. And I think Steve Reese will be back, the incoming president of the International Federation of Healthcare Engineering, as part of the closing remarks today about the conference that they will be having in Toronto for an international audience in 2022. And a lot of the work that we're doing now is looking particularly North America wide, but hoping to expand with hospital data from Europe and from Australia to move in the direction towards what we're kind of boldly referring to here as in search of the most energy efficient hospitals in the world. So the heart and soul of greening healthcare is these kind of metrics, is the energy use metrics, the savings potential metrics, the greenhouse gas emissions metrics, and expanding the scope of that, which is now a lot easier because of the mandates increasingly across North America for public reporting of data. Our little team here is particularly proficient in going and trawling all those data, bringing it together, making sense of it, and presenting it. So setting the stage here for what we have so far and over the next 12 months leading up to the IFHE conference in Toronto in September 2022, we'll be looking to expand this with exactly that goal of recognizing, not just recognizing and celebrating the most efficient hospitals in North America, but also documenting what makes them special. Why are they more efficient? Our plan is to report on newly built hospitals and older facilities that have worked their way up. And just to give you a foretaste of what that's going to look like, these are acute care facilities, greater than 100,000 square feet. And in this case, the actual energy usage, you can see the equivalent kilowatt hours per square foot, which is the Canadian metric for energy use intensity. See those numbers across the horizontal, the axis at the bottom, and the count of hospitals. So there are 252 hospitals taking that we have this data on so far. Again, they're all acute care. They're all over 100,000 square feet. We consider those to be substantial facilities. And processing those ones at this point in time, we begin with the top 20 as they are today. We're not going to name them because there's data verification required. And frankly, we think the story has only just begun. We're expecting to see 1,000 hospitals in this data set by the time we get to 2022. But the top 20 of the category referred to as city acute care services, the most efficient are the little ones in the boxes up there. Those are the, so these should be comparable hospitals to the acute care facilities you have. And out of the top performers there, 9 of them are between 100,000 and 1 million square feet. 9 are between 1 and 2 million square feet. 2 are bigger than 2 million square feet. And winners right now, 6 of them are located in Ontario, and we think that's a good thing for Ontario. Where, you know, if all the Ontarians on the line, they should be pleased with this because they're not the majority of hospitals reporting right now. So 6 are in Ontario, 3 in California, 3 in Chicago, and so on. You can read the distribution. Those numbers will move around over the course of the year, and increasingly we'll have profiles and case studies and stories to categorize the most efficient, the most energy efficient, and again, document what makes them special in a way that others can look at and evaluate and potentially replicate if they apply to their own hospital sites. And again, these data are all weather normalized. We're not getting into that methodology here, but it's documented in a white paper that you can find on the Greening Healthcare website. But these are all weather normalized to Ottawa in terms of energy use intensity. And that's where the top 20 comes from. For our friends from south of the border, which there are a number on this webinar today, 17 of the 20 are the same ones. As you can imagine, the weather normalization moves things around a little bit, but Ontario lose one in the shuffle, California picks up a couple, and so on. But this is the general idea as this send us your best. We'll talk about this at the end as to if you have hospitals that you think could be at the top end of this benchmark chart. We'd love to hear from you after the forum today. But this is the beginning of that analysis, and we'll talk in a moment about first, how do we convert the energy use intensities, which are not a direct metric of efficiency, into the idea of energy targets and savings potential. And then over time, how are we going to learn from those to move forward, and why is that worth the effort? So this is a major initiative of Greening Healthcare over the next 12 months to move into the whole idea of energy targets. The aim by finding the most efficient hospitals is exactly as listed here. First, finding and learning from and documenting the most efficient buildings so that those best practices, which in our experience are more operational and controls than they are around the actual technology installed. The whole principle of measuring things so that they can be properly managed. So Energy Star Portfolio Manager does a great job of ranking facilities with an Energy Star score. That is direct comparison between sites. The Real Property Association of Canada has done this a decade ago for commercial office buildings. And the idea that it's good to know where you're at, how you compare, but knowing what a rational end point is. How much can you actually improve? How much can you save? So the manage what you measure message is clear. The savings potential, and we'll show you how this looks on a couple of example Greening Healthcare hospitals later in this program. But that number, whether you can save $50,000 a year or $500,000 a year or $2 million a year, that's the beginning of the business case for action. That's the beginning of the conversation with your executive about committing capital and resources to making efficiency improvements. The data we can, I think, show you as we go through our case studies this afternoon points you to, in any particular hospital, the actual measures that have the highest potential for achieving those savings. So not just quantifying the overall savings potential for any hospital, but pointing to you which measures you should be focusing upon. And again, I'm really happy with the case studies we had this afternoon and how they help to illustrate that process. How do you get pointed in the right direction? And performance management. Increasingly, we had a fair amount of the discussion this morning was around performance metrics and KPIs, and how do we align healthcare organizations around the mandate to be more efficient, and by extension to reduce greenhouse gas emissions associated with stationary energy use within their facilities. So there's a lot of good reasons. There's a lot of work going on around building specific targets. Greening Healthcare has done a lot of developmental work there. We're hoping that on a go-forward basis, we know we use it now with Greening Healthcare members. We hope the idea can be useful to all the hospitals that are on the line today. You'll hear a lot about the top quartile savings, which means essentially of everybody who is less efficient. Every hospital is less efficient than the top 25 percentile. If we just bring them all up to the top quartile, the magnitude of savings there is what we'll report on a preliminary basis this afternoon. But top quartile is considered good practice. It doesn't require new technology. It just requires running existing hospital systems efficiently, operating them, controlling them, maintaining them in an efficient fashion. And 25% of hospitals are already there. So it's considered to be the readily attainable goal. Many hospitals will recalibrate their goals to top decile levels, which because their ambition is to become leaders in this space. We consider top decile to be a high performance standard, and generally it requires some capital investment to get there from here. So you can set your goals based on the targets that come out of this kind of data analytics. And here are the targets right now. For those of you of a Canadian persuasion, the top two charts, fit there. And for those of from south of the border, the KBGU equivalent down below. And very simply, what Michael's done here is to take standard targets that we use within Greening Healthcare and weather normalize them to Ottawa as being, if you like, representative for the Canadian building stock, and to Fresno, California as being representative of kind of the southern part of the United States. So Fresno is not the warmest climate in California, but is kind of mid-state that is representative. These numbers are what we initially use, and we'll talk about adjustments in a second. But the idea of the targets is that you can compare your actual energy use with target energy use to direct you to the magnitude of the savings potential, both in energy units, in greenhouse gas emissions, and in utility costs. You can see here the effect of the weather normalization, which affects cooling electricity and heating thermal, whereas a base electric, which is lights and fans and medical equipment, and base thermal would be domestic hot water and sterilizers and reheat in air handling systems. Those things are largely non-weather dependent. So these are standard targets. And again, all of this is documented in a white paper that's on the Greening Healthcare website. Why it matters to the hospitals on the call, whether you're a Greening Healthcare member or not, is it's a rational starting point for saying, where am I at? How do I compare? And what are my first steps in terms of making improvements on a go-forward basis? So these are standard targets. And again, if you've got questions, I'm guessing most of them would be technical by nature, and we'll be happy to pick them up after the webinar. And we love talking about this stuff. So please do post your questions. But here are starting points that you can compare your own data with. And the target adjustments, again, the whole methodology is set out in the white paper that's referenced at the bottom. You'll find it at greeninghc.com. The standard targets are adjusted to your particular weather station. They're adjusted for the particular mix of space types that you might have within the hospital. You may have some long-term care space, some continuing care space, some acute care space. They're adjusted for significant enclosed parking areas, for laundry. If you have absorption cooling, it requires more thermal energy and less electricity, and so on. So these are the factors right now that are adjusted for in setting site-specific targets. And again, the actual metrics and numbers used are contained within the white paper that's referenced here. And the starting point for every hospital that joins Greening Healthcare is to have those targets developed for their particular facility and point out both the overall magnitude of the savings potential. They're looking at 5% savings potential or 50%, and the components of energy use, those non-weather sensitive base components, the weather sensitive components, where those savings are to be found. And that points directly to the building systems that need attention. So you're all in the medical business, one way or another. And this is the equivalent of a medical checkup. You're going to get your testing done, your blood pressure and your blood work to provide the indication of where the treatment is needed. What's the magnitude of the treatment and where it's needed? This targeting method goes that. So when that is applied to a whole set of, so preliminary targets have been established for those 252 hospitals we looked at just a moment ago, from all the different jurisdictions across North America that we've been able to find data on so far. It winds up with savings potential, where you can see there's a handful at the top that have no savings potential at all. So they're already meeting or exceeding those targets. And there's a handful at the bottom that have an excessive 50% energy savings potential. Again, subject to data verification and subject to adjustments of targets based on site-specific conditions, all of which we've done. Our focus is going to be at the hospitals at the top end of this chart and getting to understand more of those so that we can refine the targets and refine the session. But looking at any portfolio, whether it's a state or a province, whether it's a large healthcare provider with multiple sites, those groups can be collected to produce that box in the middle there, like how many reporting institutions, what's the total building area involved, the target savings potential in terms of electricity, in this case for this whole subset. The overall opportunity is 19%, which is close to 1 million megawatt hours a year. The thermal potential is 38%. The utility cost is $250 million a year. And the greenhouse gas emissions is 815,000. We like that number because our goal is always looking for a megaton of actual emissions reductions. Those are meaningful numbers on a world stage. So again, these are there's well over 1,000 hospitals in the Greening Healthcare database right now. This is the subset that are acute care and over 100,000 square feet. We screened out some that look like duplicates or look like data errors, and we wind up here with the savings potential in overall, in total energy use, in percentage, and with those metrics in the middle. And our focus over the next 12 months is looking harder and engaging with the hospitals at the top of this chart and getting, again, a bit more of a building information profile, but building systems profile that allows us to refine this and winds up quite simply with these are the ones that will be categorized and recognized in 2022 as the most energy efficient hospitals in North America. And if we're successful in getting data, which we expect from the UK and Australia, we're going to be bold and say these are the most energy efficient in the world, because there's nothing like setting yourself up for that kind of thing and then having other people come, what about us and what about us? And the answer will always be, send us your data and we're happy to run it through the same process. So for us, big initiative. We believe that the key to deep emissions reductions in the hospital sector lies within the existing metrics, the existing data, and that it provides the most powerful, pragmatic, cost-effective way of tackling individual hospitals and tackling groups and portfolios of hospitals. And that's the pathway that Greening Healthcare will continue to pursue along these lines. So once again, we welcome questions. I see a fair amount of chat, but not very many questions and answers right now. If it's a question to be answered, please put it in the Q&A box, and we'll look at these at the end of this particular conversation, but also look to an ongoing dialogue with interested hospitals in this sphere on a go-forward basis. Final piece of this, we said we'd find some lessons learned, and this is a really interesting illustration of using the metrics to help identify best practices, to identify top performers and lesser performers, and really pull out the lessons learned so that everybody can improve together. So this takes a little bit of walking through, so bear with me for a moment if I may. We've got the same energy components that we looked at a moment ago. The base components are non-weather sensitive, they're year-round loads. The weather sensitive are cooling on the electricity side and heating on the thermal energy side. And for each of these hospitals, I think there's 17 here. Each of these hospitals, you can see both the current actual use, and this was, I think, Michael, 2019 data or 2018? 2019 data. 2019 data compared to the targets. These are brand new P3 hospital, brand new hospitals in Ontario that were built under the public-private partnership model, under the jurisdiction of Infrastructure Ontario, who have developed real expertise around the development, construction, and ongoing performance of new facilities. The ones that are showing all green there are already meeting all of their targets. These are, for us, for in Ontario now, these are the cream of the crop. These are the ones that we can learn from. The others, in most cases, similar technology, very similar design process, very similar performance metrics attached to them, that so far are not achieving the kind of performance levels that the group in the top part of this block are. You can see from 2018 to 2019 in that change versus 2018, the one beside electricity, the one beside thermal energy. In particular on thermal energy, a number of them, as they're getting used to these sophisticated plants with heat recovery chillers and condensing boilers and less steam, and orchestrating those plants together, how they're continuing several years after they were built to make some quite dramatic improvements in thermal energy performance. You can see hospitals there with 31%, 37%, 29% savings year on year. And that's the same technology, just finding better ways of orchestrating how the plant all works together to achieve better outcomes. In some cases, electricity use has been creeping up, but this is ongoing monitoring, ongoing tracking of performance. Mike Rohan, if you're on the call, you can see the kind of greenhouse gas emissions numbers coming there, where kilograms per square foot is 1,000th of metric tons per square foot. So some of these are quite extraordinary greenhouse gas emissions numbers. So we believe there's a lot to learn, both from the recently built hospitals that are performing exceptionally well, as to how do we replicate those technologies and operational practices in the larger number of existing hospitals, and also what went wrong with some of the others that they're struggling to achieve the performance of which they're capable. So this particular work, again, we've been tracking these hospitals now for the past 4 years. The most recent, the 2020 data for these hospitals, we'll be presenting that by webinar on October the 6th this year. And if you're on this webinar, we'll be informing you of the logistics and how to sign on to that. The central point of all of this is we look far and wide around the world trying to find comparable initiatives that are either using data or have other ways of driving forward emissions reductions within hospital facilities. We've yet to find another program which is comparable, and to pick up on Mike Rohan of Northwell Health, when we do, we will shamelessly steal from it to bring it through. But this is the heart of Greening Healthcare's program to help hospitals across North America and around the world self-evaluate where they stand, compare themselves with peers, identify the best measures, and then track their improvement over time. So Michael, let me pause there just for a moment, if I may. Other questions that we should be dealing with now, or questions that we might pick up on?
I've been answering them through the chat. It's mostly just around what cities were included in the database and what some of the metrics we have are. Okay, that's great. And we continue to go trawling all of the publicly reported jurisdictions for this. But say for us to move the hospital, the complex hospital infrastructure from where it is to its most energy efficient, carbon efficient format, we do not know of a better way of doing that than through data, comparative data, target standards, evidence-based best practices. And this really is the heart of greening healthcare on a drive forward basis. And again, we encourage everybody with an interest in this space to join us
October the 6th, where there's every one of these particular hospitals has a story to tell. The third from the top there, so the C's are continuing care hospitals, the A's are acute care hospitals. A1 is Humber River Hospital. There's a case study being developed on that right now that goes down to system level metrics. What makes it so efficient? And is it lighting? Is it heating? Is it fan power? System level metrics that we'll be presenting initial findings from that case study work on October the 6th that will help everybody to, at the system level, evaluate their facilities and work forward from that. So that's what we wanted to share with you around benchmarking. And again, to repeat, this is the starting point for every new member of Greening Healthcare as a hospital is what is your savings potential, which is the dollar savings, the greenhouse gas emission savings, the energy savings potential. And when you look at the components, where should you be looking? Again, the biggest piece for us on lessons learned, if you look at the thermal, if you look at the pink ones in the bottom part of that chart, most of that is around base thermal. And the biggest single issue that's been surfacing so far is that's mostly reheat in the air conditioning, so the air handling systems. And the biggest factor contributing to that is less scheduling, less really focused scheduling and smart control strategies than we're seeing in the hospitals at the top of this chart. So lessons being learned, they continue to be learned, and we'll continue to share them at the annual reporting on this group of hospitals, which by the way grows over time. We have 30 more hospitals in the pipeline coming up, so more hospitals get added to this every year, which kind of further enriches the lessons learned.